Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco just shout on movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. And it's just Marco here to finally do Doctor Sleep spoilers. I've been looking forward to doing this video, honestly, because The Shining is one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and this movie is a great movie to have a discussion about because it does so many things wrong, yet you clearly see all these little things that could have been good and all these little tweaks they could have made that would have made it a good movie. And also, it really failed at the box office, so that's another discussion. Like, why did this movie fail? I mean, I'm pretty sure the Child's Play remake did better than this movie. I don't want to say that for sure because I've said quite a bit of things on this channel that have been false in terms of like factual stuff like casting, like saying that I thought a certain person was in this show or that movie. So I don't want to say for sure, but I mean, compared to what it should have done, Doctor Sleep was an epic fail. And it's not surprising to me, honestly. People have such short attention spans nowadays. They go to movies, and if something isn't happening in 5 minutes, then they'll go to sleep, they'll leave the movie, they'll sit there and complain and be like, come on, get to the action. They'll pull out their phones, they'll stare at their phones, call someone on their phones. Like, people nowadays, they're so much, in my opinion, they're so stupider compared to the older audiences. And by older, I mean from other past decades, not like older people, because I mean, just as bad. But yeah, I mean, and the reason why I say that is because you have this movie, and it's not, and the thing that I liked about it was it wasn't as modern horror-ish as all these other crappy horror movies, fake horror movies that came out this year. And so I appreciated how it was different, but there were so many things wrong with it, and the mere look of the movie was problematic for me, the way that they did the color filter, because in my opinion, if they had just, if here's what you should have done: keep the color the same the whole movie except for the dream sequences, because in this movie and the flashbacks, you keep regular color, because there's so many times in this movie where things happen, like the little kid getting killed, and like I wanted to see that in color. That would have been much more effective, like in the original one where we see the Grady twins and there's blood everywhere, and it's bright red blood. It's not darkened, crappy, edgy blue looking blood. You know, it's bright red. And that might be a problem with the censors, because they've talked about this nowadays. They purposefully do this kind of thing with horror. There's this TV show that I loved called Hannibal, and what Brian Fuller did was there was so much blood on the show that he darkened the show's colors in order to make it pass to be able to be put on television. That's why a lot of people are like, how did Hannibal get on TV? It's because he did all this editing to make the censors happy. And so I don't know if that was a choice for the censors, in which case I would say release the movie on disc with the normal color, with all that other color filter crap out of the movie, or if it was creative, because honestly, if the color was normal in this movie, I would like it 40% better than I do now. I said that it's a candy apple where the caramel is really tasty and delicious, and then the inside is this rotten apple with worms and crap. Well, if this movie had that awful color filter taken off, the apple would not have been rotten. It still would have had worms in it, but it would not have been rotten. And that is the fact about this movie, is that there are so many little things so many little things that like they were doing that like didn't make any sense. Like the recastings, and especially Jack Torrance near the end. And another problem I have with him is that uh, he Jack Torrance is that he's the bartender. Why is he the bartender? Lloyd is the bartender. Jack Torrance should not be taking someone else's ghost job. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's just convenient. It's just convenient plot crap so that we can have him talking to someone in the bar, in the gold room. That's the only reason. Jack Torrance should have been something else. We should have seen Jack Nicholson come back. And again, that's another issue. There's no actors from the original movie except for Danny, and he's in one little scene as a cameo. I wished out of anything to see Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, he was supposed to come out of retirement to do this crappy remake of a German comedy. Tony Erdmann is what it was called, and he decided not to do it because it stank of probably of being terrible because the writers left and the main actress is Kristen Wiig. Ugh. And so I don't blame him for that, but out of anything, he should have come back for this one movie, this one cameo, this one scene. It is such, and that's another thing, they build it up to be such, oh my god, this scene is legendary. Just wait, you're gonna see, oh my god, it's Jack Torrance. But, oh, wait, no, it's not. It's this weird-looking guy who's wearing, like, a ball cap and a wig. Doesn't sound anything like him. Doesn't look anything like him. Doesn't anything like him. Doesn't make any sense. Another thing, you could have gotten Jack Nicholson's sons. One of his sons, they look like him, kinda. You could have done that. You could have done a bunch of different things. I was actually excited to see Henry Thomas in this movie. I looked it up on the cast list that Henry Thomas was in it, and Henry Thomas, he put on my favorite interpretation of Norman Bates in Psycho 4 besides Anthony Perkins. But God, he was terribly cast. And I saw Rob Ager is probably one of my top favorite film analysis reviewers, and he said that there were no other reviewers that talked about this recasting. And believe me, I could talk about the recastings for hours, because as soon as the movie started, when you had these flashbacks that were trying to integrate stuff from Stephen King's book, you can tell automatically Wendy is not Shelley Duvall. Which I think that I don't think they could have gotten Shelley Duvall back, but I don't know. There's something they were doing with her voice where they were like copying lines from her that she said in the first one, and they were using her actual voice and like trying to mix it with this actress's voice. Terrible, terrible. And then the kid who played Danny didn't look anything like him. I did kind of like Halloran. I liked the scene particularly, I liked the scene where he says goodbye. I thought that was a very nice scene. That scene made me feel good. It was a little emotional scene, not very emotional, but just it was a good scene. I liked that scene. Another thing, besides the recastings, which completely took me out of the movie, I mean, Rob Ager brought this up. I didn't even notice this. The guy who says, "Great party, sir," or "Great party, isn't it?" and he's got the glass full of blood. He's British in the older movie. In this one, they cast an American actor. And it's laziness. It's laziness. It's weird. It's so weird. Why can't you do the simplest things? Hiring a British person to play a British character. It's so weird. And like, I didn't like any of the recastings for the Overlook characters as well. I didn't like the look of the hag in the bathtub, or the witch. I call her the witch, because I think that she's got that cackle, the witch's cackle. I don't think that they did a good job with that. I didn't really like the twins. Well, I guess the twins were good. But I mean, I'm one of those people. I wasn't a really big fan of the twin scene in the original movie. Like a lot of people say that scene is like the best scene of the film. I'm not a big fan of the scene. I think there's a lot better scenes. I appreciate a lot of the talking scenes. Like I'm one of those people. And so, in fact, I think my favorite scene is probably the scene where either there's two scenes. The one where he has a nightmare, where Jack has a nightmare, and he's like really panicking and he's describing it, and you have Danny walking in and he's just sucking his thumb. That was creepy. And then the scene, of course, that everyone loves, where she confronts him and sees the manuscript and the whole baseball bat thing. Those two scenes are far better than the twins scene for me. And so, yeah, it's a little off topic. Sorry, it's just, I love that the first Shining with a passion. So I'll talk about it for hours if I could. And let's talk about the the quote villains of this movie. We have Rose the Hat, played by Rebecca Ferguson, and then Snakebite Andy, played by an actress who I didn't look up for this video. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking, because honestly, Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat is probably the sexiest female character I've seen on screen this entire year. Like, the whole movie, I didn't ever look at her as being scary, as being frightening, and so that was really weird. And it just goes along with, like, you have Stephen King's book, and then you have the movie, and the movie should have been smarter than the book. And with Rebecca Ferguson, I mean, wow. She is something in this movie. Even when she has the glowing eyes when she's killing the kid. I mean, that scene itself, we could talk about that scene, because that scene really didn't affect me, because they kept cutting out of that scene to other places. And also they kept on showing this blood, and everything was so dark you couldn't see anything. It wasn't scary to me. And the kid who played him, I just didn't see the purpose of having such a famous kid actor playing this really tiny part. And also there are some other problems with that scene, which I'll talk about. And then let's talk about Snakebite Andy. Her entire plot should have been cut out of the movie. She was another extremely beautiful character in this movie. It was very hard when they were on screen not to just stare at them and just daze off of the story and just forget all about the story and just stare at them, because they're both extremely beautiful. But the whole plot with the Snakebite Andy is terrible. I mean, she's playing this sort of vigilante person who goes around scarring pedophiles from dating sites. Very weird. And very Stephen King-y plot line there. And they recruit her instead of killing her. And that was fine. I like the fact that we got to see, like, them recruiting someone instead of killing them. But then what they do is they make her kind of annoying. And then here's the ultimate irony. Remember how she was hunting pedophiles? Well, she becomes one. I mean, oh my God. They're in the van. I mean, they got a pedophile van. They got a van. They're in a big van hunting down kids who conveniently have the Shining ability. And Snakebite Andy is sitting there in the back seat, and when the men up front can't get the little boy to get in the van, they open the door, and this girl who's just hunting pedophiles is now a pedophile herself, and she's like,
Hey, little boy, you want to get in the van? You can trust me. I'm Snakebite Andy.
Or whatever she says.
I'm Andy, and you can trust me. Just get in the van. We can play together.
Like, what? You were just the pedophile, and now you're just hunting down pedophiles, and now you're getting this kid in the van, and then she's perfectly okay with killing this little boy. What the hell? What? That doesn't make any sense. Stephen King. Stephen King, hello? The book. Get off the book, okay? Don't copy the book. Warning. Because this is what you get. This weird, nonsensical plot. I mean, what they should have done is had her really freak the F out and start trying to fight the other vampires, and then they kill her too. Because honestly, I liked watching her because I thought she was hot, but her whole character, her whole story should have been cut out of the movie because of that whole nonsensical mess that they did that I just talked about. And so then, my favorite parts of the movie, these are my favorite parts. One, the gunfight scene. Whoa, that was awesome. I kind of wish they did that at the hotel though, because it was reminiscent to me of in the first movie where they were talking about how when they built the Overlook they had to fight off all these Native American Indian attacks, and so it would have been really interesting and a nice parallel if they had had this battle. It's a great battle. I loved this part of the movie. I loved how they tricked them, and there's a teddy bear. I mean, just that was great. That was cool. That was a cool scene. That was so creative and cool. And then also the car kidnapping scene. I loved when Danny took over her body, and in this moment he really proved to me, and again, let's talk about Danny in a few seconds, but in the scene he's like so in charge, and he, like, even though this girl's kidnapped and he's telepathically possessing her or whatever, he makes this guy crash his car by simply saying, "Oh, of course you don't wear your seatbelt," and then he just does a little push, and boom, he just flies out of the car and dies. That was so cool, and such a cool subversion of a cliche of like someone getting kidnapped and having to go rescue them. That was cool. Once again, those two things were very cool. And other than that, there's one element that I thought was cool, and this element was making the ghosts at the Overlook more powerful than anyone in the whole movie. In my opinion, they were more powerful than everyone. All the characters with The Shining, including the cult, including the sexy leader of the cult, they were more powerful. The only thing I didn't like about that was the fact that they ruined it by trying to redo Stephen King's book in this movie, and that's something we'll talk about, because they make it to where, oh, the Overlook itself is the villain, not the individual ghosts. And so that really took it out of the movie for me. That pissed me off, because in the original, something that I liked a lot was how it felt like, and again, I'm not talking about the subliminal stuff. I'm not talking about the hidden narratives at all in this video, because that's a whole different topic. That would completely destroy this movie to obliteration. But I loved how in the original you had all these different people who are now ghosts, and they're working together as like this little group of ghosts. And it really felt creepy to me, like they all were in cahoots together to drive this family insane. And in this movie, they completely take that out by making the ghosts just generic ghosts, evil ghosts. They're not really people, they're not really actual people, they're just all the hotel represented as one group. And because they have this embarrassing moment where the only ghosts is this one group of ghosts that we saw in the first movie. Obviously, there were many more ghosts in the first movie we probably never got to meet, probably never got to see, or couldn't exist in the first place, but that's part of the hidden narrative. But yeah, didn't like that. Another thing is that this movie, a lot of it, well, I guess you'd say the book, a lot of it is a ripoff of this Goosebumps episode called Vampire's Breath. And a lot of people have said, and that this group of people, this cult, they're vampires. I don't really agree. I think that vampires, I don't know how to describe it, but just, they don't remind me of vampires. They more so reminded me of the Manson family. Like, this is what I thought they should have done with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, having this evil family doing things throughout the movie and having to get stopped at the end. This really showcased to me how the Manson family should have been done, just without the supernatural stuff. But in Goosebumps, Vampire's Breath, it's basically the same thing. Vampires, well, it's kind of the same thing. Vampires breathe into these bottles. They breathe this mist, a mist, just like in this movie, into these bottles, and then they breathe the mist in. The only difference is that in the movie, they're breathing the mist from other people, whereas in Goosebumps, it's basically their vampire essence. It's all their power that they put into a bottle that they then breathe the next time they want to eat someone. But that was really funny to me, how much of a copy it was of that Goosebumps episode. Because you know what? You need to go watch that episode of Goosebumps, Vampire's Breath, because it's a really underrated episode. The one who plays the main vampire does an extremely good job. There's a lot of great lighting and camera work. Just in general, it's a very creepy episode. The only thing that sucked about it was the really corny, fake set that comes into play near the end with this foggy area. That's all I'll get into with that. But then let's talk about Danny. Danny is the hero from beginning to end with this movie. There's no growth at all. At all. Because in the beginning of the movie, people like to say that he's evil and that, he's, oh god, look at him. It's just this very vague, generic, oh look, he's really down on his luck because he's getting drunk and he's sleeping with a hooker and who likes to do drugs, and oh my god, look at how down on his luck he is. And it was just so fake. It was just so just fake and staged and not authentic. It was like trying to copy Breaking Bad but doing a very poor job of it. And and then you have the whole weird editing thing where he's sleeping with a hooker and at the same time he's having a fight in the bar, which I actually, another thing I really liked was there's this one moment where he picks up a pool ball and he just boom uses it to bash into this guy's face, and that was very reminiscent of, that was one of the few throwbacks that I liked, the few integrations. In Stephen King's book, at one point she picks up a croquet ball and uses it to bash in her husband's head or just throw it at him. And I like the fact that he used that. That was cool. I really liked that. That was very cool. A cool moment out of a crappy start. But, I mean, there's never any moment. I would have loved to have seen a movie where he was just a complete douchebag, disgusting, evil person the whole movie. And then in the third act, he finally turns good and becomes the hero that he is. Because in this movie, he's basically like, oh, he's this good guy, and he'll help anyone, and he wants to change, and he's such a decent person. He doesn't cause trouble in his new apartment. He doesn't do anything wrong. He helps old people die. That was another plot that could have been cut out. That was a big part of Stephen King's book. is the whole old people thing. In fact, I think it would have been a lot more interesting if he instead had met a version of his dad in the old folks' place, the hospice. It would have been great if there was this father and he was really, really abusive. Or maybe you had a mother who was like an enabler, like Wendy was. She was a horrible person just as much as her husband. And like it would have been really cool for him to connect with an old person who was like that instead of just connecting with these, few old people. In fact, honestly, I would have liked the whole movie basically to have been in the old folks' home and have done that. Like I heard that they did that in the book, but like again, I think that they should have done two different movies. They should have done this Doctor Sleep book as a Netflix miniseries, and then they should have done a Kubrick sequel on the big screen. Because Kubrick's movie works a lot better on the big screen, and you could have done something really original and cool, because everything that I said about this movie that was going to be wrong with it was wrong with it, and even more. So, yeah. I'm talking a lot. I could go on and on because this movie is so full of stuff to talk about. The fact that he's a hero of the whole movie, and then you have Abra. I really liked Abra personally. I thought she was cool. I liked her character. I thought that she had a lot of potential, but she was just like Danny. I mean, both of them. They were very, very, perfect hero characters. They didn't really have any growth throughout the movie. And at the beginning of the movie, they introduced Abra, and it was a very Stephen King-y type of flashback scene. It reminded me a lot of Rose Red, when the little girl's watching TV and she causes like a meteor crash to like kill her neighbors. Like that was what reminded me when she was drawing the picture. That was totally like what this scene was with the magician or the clown or whatever. And yeah, she was this trickster. She was this, she couldn't control her powers. And that never really comes into play the rest of the movie. I mean, she's perfect. The whole movie, even at the end where you think, in the last fight, when you think she messes up and she's just this really overconfident trickster, it turns out it was all part of the plan to begin with. And so, yeah, she has a couple of flaws, but not really. Neither does Danny. They're both very, very perfect people. And that was a big problem for me, especially because Stephen King complained about the original, how Jack was evil from beginning to end. And, well, what about these guys? These heroes. They are perfect from beginning to end. There's never a moment in the movie where you feel like they're actually going to fail, where they're actually going to lose a fight. I mean, they win like every fight they have. That's another thing. Rose the Hat, I really wish that she would have been killed off and that the real villain had been Carl Strucken, because he could have been a really intimidating old force of evil. And just the way that he did a great job, even though he didn't really have that much. And I would have loved if she had died and then he was the real villain at the end, because he was very intimidating and she was not, because she was too hot, number one, and that wouldn't have been a problem if she was just utilized better. But also, she's tricked. She gets defeated so many times in this movie. She's not scary, but Carl could have been, or Carol, or whatever. Carl, that tall guy, he's a great actor. He's in a lot of different things, and I would have loved to have seen him been the villain. There's lots of things that are just stolen from the original Stephen King book and then implemented, and such as the ending of this movie where Danny gets possessed And, oh, conveniently, she stabs him in the leg, which makes him limp just like his dad limped around the hotel in the original. And, oh, conveniently, he gets the axe just like his dad got the axe in the original. And, oh, conveniently, he's saying things like, take your medicine, little pup, just like in the book. And conveniently, he's like talking like a drunkard and everything. And then conveniently, he decides to blow himself up and kill himself in the hotel. Very, very dumb. That really pissed me off too, because I actually really liked the part where he's talking to her in the bedroom, and I got this great feeling of like, yes, he survived somehow. He escaped this horrible place. But no, he didn't. He just killed himself because they have to redo the book. And again, Rob Ager talked about this. It definitely felt like this movie was made to rewrite history and to rewrite Stanley Kubrick's movie to make it more like Stephen King's book. Because it was very weird too. Danny, the last thing he wants to see is his mom, the woman who allowed him to be abused for years and years. She's the last person he wants to see. He's so content with dying in this place where all this abuse, horrible trauma happened. That's weird. Very weird. I actually liked that scene where he was talking to her and they just ruined it. And they did a lot of that in this movie. They did a lot of like, oh, we're going to do something cool. And then it just fizzles out. And so what else should I talk about? Yeah, I talked about that. I'm just going through my notes here. Why are Wendy and Danny still living in the same apartment? This I don't know if this is true or not completely, because I can't rewatch it and compare it because of all the crappy color filtering that made the movie look horrible. But in the all this abuse happened in this apartment, and why are you living in this apartment where you got abused all the time? It's just common sense. If you were raped in an apartment, you wouldn't want to live in the same apartment. It's just common sense. If someone near you was killed in the room that you slept in, you wouldn't want to sleep in that room anymore. Like, weird. But they did this thing in the movie where they made a lot of the different sets, like rooms that weren't the actual rooms from the original, they made them look like rooms from the original. Like, the head of the hospice, he has this office that looks exactly like Ullman's office. And so I don't know if they just recreated the apartment look or it was the actual apartment. But either way, should not have been in the same apartment. Another thing, the message seems to be for Abra not to hide her shining. But throughout the whole movie, she's showing off all the time. The only time where she doesn't want to show off is with her parents, because it's one of those cliche kid doesn't want to tell their parents something stories. And so, yeah. So that was weird how the whole movie she's totally cool with showing off. Like her first scene, she's showing off to her parents with the forks and knives and spoons. And then the message at the end of the movie is, shine on, shine on. Like, it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me. The director and writer has a very superficial understanding of the original Shining. That is why this movie does not work. And again, this would not have been a problem if it was not trying to emulate Stanley Kubrick's movie and was not trying to be a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's movie. So yeah, I talked about that. And the original film, this is going to talk a little about the hidden narratives. In the original film, quite a bit of the ghosts are just supposed to be parallels to Jack, or just supposed to be Jack, but in a different form, like the bathtub woman. I mean, it's clear that Jack strangled Danny in the movie and in the book. And so, the bathtub woman is not like this. The way that they portray her in the movie, she's like the ultimate overlooked villain, where she appears everywhere, and like she's the only ghost who appears in Danny's apartment. She's the only ghost that can leave the hotel. That's another thing. She should not be allowed to leave the hotel. That's another issue. So the biggest understanding is Tony. Tony is not a representation of The Shining itself as portrayed in Doctor Sleep. Tony is more of just, in Kubrick's version, Tony is more of just a figure. He's like an invisible friend. He's this guide, and he's fake. I mean, he's not real. He's just something to help Danny go through this. He's not The Shining. Tony is not The Shining. The Shining is The Shining, and Tony is Tony. So yeah, the movie is called Doctor Sleep, and that plot line is hardly in the movie at all. And that's another reason why it could have been cut out, is because the whole Doctor Sleep, oh, he helps people go to sleep and die, it's hardly in the movie, and should not have been called Doctor Sleep, and should have been cut out, or it should have just stayed in the hospice and done the book. So yeah, and then another thing Rob Ager mentioned was the heartbeat, and all the music in this movie reminded me of Toy Story 4, and that's where I wanted to discuss this whole heartbeat thing, because in this movie a lot of the times there's this heartbeat that just every single scene basically it's trying to make it more hardcore and edgier and scarier, and it's not scary at all, and it's just irritating. I mean, take it out, put the color back in the movie, leave it alone, make an original score that sounds like it's a part of Kubrick's Shining but isn't. Be creative, because the same thing happened with Toy Story 4. The soundtrack in Toy Story 4 was literally just elements from other Toy Story movie soundtracks cut together and mixed into one. Like there would be a certain part, and it would sound exactly like, oh, I remember that part from Toy Story 2 where this happened and this happened when that music was playing. The exact same thing happened in this movie. The only music that I really liked, and again, I liked just this one part because it made sense to play this. When they're driving up the mountain and they played the original Shining theme song, that made a lot of sense, but it was not really that effective. I liked the beginning, but as it went on, it got less effective. So yeah, I think you can make a host scary. And again, this movie should have been a sequel to Stephen King's crappy miniseries, because they did this big article where it said Kubrick Shining is redeemed in Stephen King's eyes. Well, you know what? It doesn't matter what Stephen King thinks about that Shining, because everyone else loves that movie. And no matter how much you try to force feed your original book down our throats, we're never going to like it more than we like Kubrick's Shining. And so what you should have done is you should have made a movie that redeemed your crappy miniseries, because you could make a host scary. And again, with the recastings, you could get that blonde woman who played Wendy in the original Shining. You could get the guy who played Danny in that Shining. You could get the Weber guy who played Jack in the original Shining. And another thing, Dick Halloran is alive from the TV miniseries. So you could have had, just like in the book, you could have had him still be alive. That would have been great. That would have been awesome. That would have been cool. It would have been fun to see that, and fun to see this sort of edgier, darker, more because it's with Netflix, and they would have been allowed to do all this other stuff that they couldn't do on the TV miniseries with the crappy effects, horrible CGI, the not scary stuff. They could have really redeemed that Shining movie, and they could have done something great and original, but instead they chose to use Kubrick's Shining as a way to bait people to watch the movie and to take a chance to see a sequel, because they knew no one would want to go see just Doctor Sleep all by itself. They would want it to connect to something. And what they should have done was had it be a great story and connect to the TV miniseries instead of just aping off of Kubrick's Shining. And for example, a way that you can make a hose scary, because I've said that now 3 times, is because I have a personal story from this year. I was in the kitchen, and right near the kitchen is my bathroom, one of my bathrooms, and in the bathroom on the floor underneath the sink area was this long, black, thick cord type thing. And I thought, oh, is that like a hose from outside? Is that something that that I should take out that was forgotten to be taken outside again, that was taken in here for some reason? And I started walking up to it, and all of a sudden it starts moving. And then it's moving, it's clear, it's a snake! It's a big fat snake! And it crawled around, it crawled into the darkness of this area behind something, and now we don't know where it is. But that happened this year, and it just makes me think, that was scary, that terrified me for a few seconds before I realized, oh, it's a snake, whatever. But that was terrifying. A lot of people don't like snakes, they're afraid of them. And you could have done something like that in this sequel that would have been a continuation of the miniseries. And so, yeah, there's one example. You could have done that. You could have had in their apartment that they're in, you could have had that hose, and that, well, the hose, quote unquote, and it could have turned out to be a snake or something. That would have been great. So yeah, that's it. Wow, this video is long. That's all I have to say. Goodbye, everyone. Please check out all of our other videos, excuse me. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, do all that stuff. Tell your friends to come watch this long video where I go in depth and talking about the many ways Dr. Sleep is flawed.